SOA 11G introduction first. Okay. So basically, as we discussed, SOA has so many components, right? So SOA is coming up with several components. You have DPM suite, you have UDDI suite, and you have security. You have so many things, right? The major thing is people mediated, and you call it as a composite. Call it as a composite. Okay. First, we'll have a brief discussion about SOA 10G. Okay, and then we'll come to SOA 11G architecture. Right. In SOA 10G, we have only the BPL process. We have only the BPL process. We were not having any mediator or anything. Okay. So, right, basically, you have written a WSDL file, right, and you have written as operation. If you are implementing that one, so where you are implementing that in a BPL process, right? So earlier, what happened? So, for example, we'll go back to this previous thing, and this BPL process, what it was doing, it was copying the name to the result, right? And what does it mean is, it is implementing your web service, right? Your BPL is implementing your web service, right? So basically, in SOA 10G or 11G, whatever the component you have, that can become a web service. That can become a web service. And internally, inside the BPL, you are actually invoking other web services, right? So BPL is what? It is an orchestration tool, right? So you will be working with web services. But BPL itself, it is also a web service, isn't it? So let us say you need to transfer funds from one account to another account. Okay, right? So for that, you will be writing one WSDL file with the operation transfer funds, and with the input of from account and to account, right? And your BPL process will receive that information, and after that you have to debit one account and you have to credit one account. Okay, assume that for debit and credit you already have another web service running. Okay, and you have to invoke first web service for debiting one account, for credit one account, and after that debit another account, right? This is what the orchestration is. So your whole BPL process is doing what? Invoking the web services in a systematic order, isn't it? Okay, so for that we actually have your BPL language. Okay, and in SOA 10G version, it was only BPL. There was no composite architecture, just the BPL language. Okay, you just have the BPL language, and this BPL, everything, this language is actually a declarative language. That means it is also, BPL is also what? Another XML language. BPL is also another XML language. It is not like your SQL, PL SQL or Java. It's not that language. It's a declarative language. That means as if you are writing any XSD or WSDL, you will be able to write the BPL file. Okay? Even though it is a programming language, it is a declarative language. Okay, that means it is, most of the declarative languages nowadays, they define it in XML. That means the configuration, that means, it is easy to understand. And people don't say it as a program, people call it as a configuration, right? Because it's everything is a declarative, you are not writing anything, right? So people say it as a configuration. So these are the different terminologies basically. So basically this, to interpret your BPL language, you need, some interpretation, right? And that interpretation, that logic was written in Java, okay, and they have deployed some Java component, JTE components as servlets, EJBs, and all those stuff. Okay, so let us say you have some commands like assign command. Assign is a thing, but kind of is equal to operation, right? For each operation, it will be invoking a Java bean. or it has internally it has a Java command to run, right? So that was the implementation. I mean, basically your Beeple engine is developed on Java technology, okay? But it is not necessary that you need to know Java, right? Because it is all the configuration, right? You will end of the day what technology you will be working with? You will be working with XML, right? So let us say if I want to work with C language, and C language has built on a binary language, right? Do I need to know binary language? No. In a similar fashion, the Beeple, internally it has implemented in Java, and from Java to C to operating system to your binary language. It is not necessary that you should know Java language. If you know Beeple language, that is fine. You can work with Beeple. It is not necessary that you should know the internal implementation of it. But when you deploy something, you need to understand how it works internally. Okay? When there are any runtime problems, then you should be able to figure it out. So that is the reason we'll have a brief discussion how the components will be deployed and how it will be organized in Java container, right? So basically, like Beeple engine comprises some servlets, some EJBs, right? And when a Beeple process is implementing a WSDL which has both the input and the output, what does it mean? It is synchronous or asynchronous? It is a synchronous operation. When it is the synchronous operation, everything, for that particular request, everything has to be done in one single thread. Okay? What you may have 100 operations in that has to be done in one single thread. Okay? And also, I'll put it in this way, in one single transaction. Okay? And one more thing is, the person is actually waiting for the response. Okay, you have to immediately give the response back, isn't it? So you have to do it immediately. So generally for sync operations, it will be done with the servlet, with the help of servlet. Okay, for sync operations, the logic will be done in the servlet and it will not call the EJBs. And for asynchronous operations, it's a fire and forget operation or asynchronous callback operation. What does that mean? You have only the input. Okay, the output may be communicated by invoking another web service later point of time, or it may be fire and forget model. You may not require to send the reply at all, right? So generally, most of the integrations are at this particular time. Okay, most of the interfaces, most of the integrations are falling under the asynchronous model. Okay, so when the asynchronous model is coming, and system will use the resources very efficiently, right? So if it is a synchronous operation, your thread will be blocked, your memory will be blocked, everything will be blocked, right? And you need high resources to actually give the high throughput. Okay, but if it is asynchronous, you have some time to give reply. Okay, then you can use the resources efficiently. Okay, so then what happens is, internally your Beeple engine uses something called EJBs. Okay, and those EJBs, for each action it uses one EJB, right? And those EJBs are stateless EJBs. Okay, it will be in another transaction, right? So what does that mean is, when you have asynchronous web service implementation, you cannot determine that by default. The default behavior is, you cannot determine that all operations are falling under the same transaction. Okay, you cannot come for a conclusion that the default behavior is one action might be done by one transaction, another action might be done by another transaction. You cannot predict. You cannot even predict that all activities are performed on the same cluster node. Okay, one activity might be performed by one cluster node, another activity might be performed by another cluster node. Because for each activity it tries to initiate one stateless EJB. Okay, and the EJB engine will create an EJB, and it might give you an EJB from the pool of one cluster engine or the another cluster engine. You cannot determine. Okay, and to control it, we have separate parameters to control this, but that is not a good architecture. The good architecture is, if we want to keep everything in the same transaction, make it synchronous instead of asynchronous, and try to manage the unit of work in that way, right? So that is the most important thing. All right. And now if I have sync WSDL file, that is input and output, a BPL has been implemented. Does it uses any EJBs? Sync operation, does it use any EJBs? Asynchronous only EJBs. And for each asynchronous, you have in BPL 10G version, you have two varieties of EJBs, for especially for BPL 11. One is the invoker bin and one is the worker bin. When you have the operations like assign operation, calculation operations, and these things, internally it uses one variety of EJB, is called worker bin. Okay, and for operations like immediately you invoked it and immediately it has to receive the information, right? This is a heavy operation. For these operations, it has used a separate EJB called invoker bin. Okay, but in 11G, everything comprises into only one EJB, right? All activities are processed by only one EJB, only in case of asynchronous, not in case of synchronous. In case of synchronous, everything will be done within the servlet request itself. Okay, so you need to understand that, and you need to understand the transaction boundaries of each invocation. Okay, then only you will be able to invoke it perfectly. Otherwise, one transaction will come in and the transaction will not come in. Okay, and that is the one thing. Okay, and in 10G, right from the 10G actually, it has something called dehydration store. It has something called a dehydration store. The concept of dehydration store is very simple. So you want to monitor, what is happening in the BPL process, right? So let us take about, we have an asynchronous operation of transfer funds, right? And one activity is debiting one account, one activity is crediting an account. Assume that this is asynchronous and somehow we have managed the transaction. Okay, at any given point of time, you want to see what happened to my BPL process and what it is doing. Okay, it's a kind of logging and monitoring. Okay, it's a kind of logging and monitoring. Okay, for monitoring generally in Java, what we'll do is we'll write a log file saying that now this operation is complete, this is the input for that, and then you do a logging. But in SOA BPL, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that one. So everything, whatever you have done, it will be registered inside a database for every time you invoke a BPL process, and your order of invocation and everything will be registered in a database. Okay, and that you will be able to see in the form of instances. So I'll show you the instances here. So earlier we have not included anything in this. So these are all the instances are actually recorded in your database. Because we have given it as a direct binding, right? So that is the reason instances will not be shown. So now, if you click on this, it opens a UI. And it will show you line by line what it is happening. First, it has received the information, right? And then it has assigned, then it has replied, right? And it will show you all this information, statically for every invoke. Okay, if you test this web service again, it creates another instance, right? so that it is easy for someone to look in what happened to my integration. Okay, all this information systematically recorded in a database schema called a dehydration store, right? So everything will be recorded in a database schema for every activity. For every activity that you have said, right from the receiving to the reply, every information will be recorded in a database schema called dehydration store. So you need very minimal logging, right? Because everything is visible, right? So you may not require very logging. I mean, it will show you what's happening and what activities are completed, what activities are pending, and all that information you will be able to see. Okay, this is called as a dehydration store. Okay, and see, basically, I mean, dehydration store means it has to hit database connection and to store the information that we have given, right? And it is also a performance overhead, right? Isn't it? Okay, let us take sync operation. So you have invoked something, you are waiting for the reply. Assume that for every activity it has to go to the database, record in the database, and then come back and give the response. It will be delayed, right? So for synchronous operations, generally the dehydration store will be hit only after the client is replied. Only after you receive the information, it will go and put the information in the database. Okay, for async operations, okay, and for the activities like wherever it has some time to think about it. That means, say that in between you have some wait operation or some operation which is taking a longer time. Then what will it do? First it will record the data in the database and then it will start working. Okay, and whenever it is active and working, it uses some in-memory database. Okay, and whenever it has some time, then only it will the information will be posted into your database. Okay, in case of asynchronous, operations. Okay, and before it will put the information, it is going to put the information in the dehydration store. It has to maintain some memory in the server, right? Because in the same memory it is actually operating. Okay, that memory is called as a recovery space or recovery memory. Okay, and whenever you see that your BPM process is taking a longer time, especially the asynchronous thing, okay, and you are not able to see the instance, there are two chances. In 10G there is one chance. Okay, so basically information has to be placed in the dehydration store. That means a database connection. Okay, if there is something wrong, I mean if some exception has occurred in BPL, what it is going to do? It is going to say rollback. When it say rollback, the dehydration store connection is also going to be rolled up. Then you will not find any information. It was a bug in 10G version up till 10.133. From 10.133, dehydration store was not participating in the global transaction. That means even though if there are any errors in the BPL, that should not affect the dehydration store. That means even you should be able to see the instance in the database. But yes, there is a chance the instance might be still running and you may not be able to find it in the instance. What was that situation? Is your BPL process asynchronous, right? And you have the activities, the assigned activities like that, and this will not force the engine to go to the dehydration store, and that assigned activity is internally invoking some Java function. It might take some time. Until that time it will be running into the recovery phase. So then you need to go to the recovery manager's console. There you will be able to see all BPL instances still running, still unable to reach your dehydration store. Okay, there are few conditions where you will not reach the dehydration store. See that it's kind of thread, like it's a win condition, right? So, and you have so many instances, those are waiting for your database connection. Okay, you may have only few connections, right? You may have only few connections in the connection port. Okay, it's a kind of win condition. So when you try to awake and try to obtain the connection, and it says that the connection is busy, when again you go back sleep, and when you wake up again, you will say that the connection is not there. Okay, so the sleep time and the wake time in between, the connection is being used by someone, and you are not getting the connection at all. right? In those situations, what happens is your instances will be piled up, and automatically it will lead to your memory leakage, right? At that time, what we have to do is there is something called forcibly you can send it to dehydration store. That means you will not request from the pool, and it will create a brand new database connection, and it will force all the instances to go to the dehydration store, and after that you have limited number of instances, then your process goes smoothly. Yes, from recovery manager you send it to dehydration store. So when you recover, then automatically that information will goes to your dehydration store, and at this time it will not use the connection from the connection pool, it will initiate a new connection with the pool direct socket connection. So then records will go. Then after finishing all the records, then your number of connections in the pool should be sufficient to accommodate the number of connections that you have. So whenever you see the instance not registered in the dehydration, go and look into your recovery manager, see if that instance is in the system. So that's how the dehydration store works. Okay, dehydration store works differently for synchronous and asynchronous. For synchronous operation, dehydration will be hit only after replying. For asynchronous operations, you have some special activities like wait operation and invoke operation and receive operations and these kind of stuff. Then only it will try to hit the database. Dehydration. Okay, there is some technical name for these kind of activities. Idempant activities, something they call it as idempant activities. So those activities are wait activity, invoke activity. There are a couple of activities, wherein a BPEL process can gain some time. Okay, let us say functionality wise, and you need some wait condition, wait for few seconds. Then BPEL engine is idle, right? Okay, then BPEL engine can go for the dehydration store, right? And these kind of activities are idempant activities. And when you are using these idempant activities, then automatically BPEL engine try to dehydrate your BPEL instance, right? But otherwise, it will keep continuing in the memory area until unless you receive a shutdown signal from the server or whatever it is.
The
right?
instance is not registered in the database. How can we restore?
Go to the recovery manager. Go to the recovery manager. In Tenji there is a separate screen for that. Go to the recovery manager, then you should do it. In this immediately it will show the recovery. In the same screen it will show. In 11G it will show it. I will show you that one. Okay?
The dehydration store is the schema.
Yeah, database schema name. It is a every instance will be stored. Right? So that is the 10G architecture. Okay? And coming to 11G, the whole architecture was changed. More major architecture is changed. Okay? In 11G, including along with BPEL, we have several components. Okay? Not just BPEL, you have mediator, you have business rules. What all we have? Workflow, then business rule, then BPL. There are so many components, right? So, to accommodate all these components, we have come up with an architecture called composite architecture. Okay? So in 20 it was just BPEL. Now it has composite. And inside the composite, you may have components. Okay? And the component may be a BPEL, or maybe a this thing, and maybe a business rule, or maybe a human workflow. Okay? So basically you have something called composite, and inside the composite you have components like BPEL, mediator, business rules, human workflow. And BPEL is used for your technical implementation of your business process, and mediator is a routing logic. Okay? Remember, go back to our introduction class. And mediator is for routing logic. Okay? And human workflow for kind of human task, approve, reject, or kind of stuff. And business rule for what? On the fly when you want to change the business functionality. saying that rate of interest, discount rates changed by hourly, okay, and you may have to use a special UI, special language for that. And these are all the SOA components, okay. And SOA 11.114 has released a week back. Last week only it has released 11.1.1.4. They have added some more components. Okay, so you have so many. I mean, the list is actually increased. Okay, so I mean the BPM is there in SOA 11.113, not in 11.112. We are teaching only 11.112. Okay, so BPM was there in 11.113, not in 11.112. So like there are so many components. Actually in 10G, all these are separate servers. Business rule is a separate server, BPM was a separate server, all are separate servers. But now they have merged everything into 11G, and 11G it becomes heavy. Right? These are actually servers, separate server. You have B2B also. And B2B in 10G it was a separate server. BAM was a separate server. BPM was a separate server. Mediator was ESB. Everything was a separate server. Okay, now everything comes into, you can deploy it on one composite or one WebLogic. Okay, actually WebLogic supports for different engines kind of stuff. Okay, inside the WebLogic, so we have separate engines. Okay, but that was not possible through with the OC project. That is the reason they have migrated everything to WebLogic. So WebLogic internally you can maintain separate engines. So it has that capability. So that is the reason they have opted for WebLogic. Right. The main architecture is you have a composite. Inside the composite, the actual task can be carried by all these components. The task may be carried by your BPL or mediator, business rule, BAM, BPM, or any component. Any component may actually take its responsibility, may fulfill that one, right? And basically, the composite architecture is like this. Right. So you have something called service and reference. In a composite, what you have different components. That is good. Okay, it is carrying the jobs. But you have something called service and the reference. Okay. So what do you mean by the service and what do you mean by the reference? Yeah. So basically, inside your composite, say if someone want to invoke your composite, and don't care whether that inside that composite that request is fulfilled by your BPL or mediator or anything. Okay, it is just a service and the request is landing in your composite, landing on your composite. Okay, by the time that WSDL has to be exposed as a service. Okay, so whatever the incoming WSDLs, what you have to define? You have to define it as a service inside the composite. And whatever the WSDLs that you are invoking outgoing, and those WSDLs you have to define it as a reference. Both are WSDLs. Okay, and this WSDL is going to be implemented by your component. That means your component is responsible for fulfilling the operation defined in the WSDL. When it is a reference, your composite is going to use that WSDL to invoke some operation. Right? That means the references are outgoing, service WSDLs are incoming. Right? So inside the composite, what all you have? Service, reference are the component. Service, reference are the component. Right? So in the same way, when you go here, this is my composite, this is my service, and this is my component. And I don't have reference because I'm just relying the same thing. And in between you have something called wire. Okay, this is a BPL process symbol. This is the WSDL that I have opened, right? And inside the WSDL I have the operation merge student operation. The merge student operation may be fulfilled by a BPL process or by a mediator or by a business rule or anything. You don't know, right? Assume that here you have another BPL process. తీసేసాను నేను స్టూడెంట్ తీసేసాను
కంట్రోల్ సేవ్ చేసి
ఫైల్స్ డిలీట్ అయిపోయాయా
లేదు
ఫైల్స్ ఆర్ డిలీటెడ్ ఓకే
Undo
no undo that is the main problem in this channel okay don't mind it's just an example right so I mean basically you have the same and the request may go to either this people process or this people process right there is a model right and the user request is landing here okay and the user cannot call any component inside the composite directly he cannot call okay if you have a people process a user cannot directly call a people process the user can invoke only the service he cannot invoke the component inside so then you have something called wire when you say this there is automatically a wiring is established when the user request is landing here the request goes to your people process that is called wiring right so if you go to the source I mean it has the imports to import your required visual files and you have the service okay don't worry about the callback and you have the component okay and you also have something called wire when the request is landing here at this service where it has to go it has to go to the people process 1 is our component so this is our component what is the implementation it is people and inside that there is a partner link and it will go to the partner and this one is what it is a service people process 1 client EP is what it is a service go and check that this is a service okay and this service has a binding of web service it is when you say .ws it is a web service binding web service SOAP binding and you can also have direct binding that is a web service SOAP T3 binding and in the same way a service when you define a service and it has to generate the concrete visual right when you say service it has to generate the concrete visual right so just remove it when it generates the concrete visual and it is going to generate you know the service name by this name okay and port type name will be this name this is the port type and this is the service so whatever the service name here you put and that is going to sorry people process 1 this is the service what was the service here is the service okay and how this service name has determined how was the service name determined here in your composite whatever the service name you give here okay that service name will be this name here you understand okay so go to the composite change the service name here okay then automatically your name will be changed here right and after that you have something called the binding and it is showing that this is the port name not the port type this is the port name and see here this is the port okay and whatever the name you gives here okay and that will be reflecting here understand okay so there is a syntactical signature here syntax here and I am trying to invoke and this particular web service with this namespace okay I am trying to invoke a web service with this particular namespace and this namespace visual is coming from bpl1.visual that is by the import I am doing what I am doing the import and this is coming from what bpl1.visual okay and this service has to bind with this particular namespace okay and the endpoint should bind to this service this port okay and if you go to this the service name is this port name is this and endpoint will be binding here right and in which visual it is binding in the WSDL which has this namespace. Okay, and what was that WSDL? Beeple process mode address. Okay, and see, basically if you want to change the service name, you have to change it here, you have to change it here. If you want to change the port name, you can just change it here. Okay, these are the driving parameters. Okay, and so this is the wiring capability. So you can wire from one, from WSDL to either your Beeple or the mediator or anything. Okay, right. So basically that is called wiring. A wiring can be in between service to component or component to reference, right? So if any component want to talk to outside world, it cannot talk directly. It has to go through a reference, and there should be a wire. Okay, and that logic they are giving it here. Okay, this is the whole composite. Okay.
Composing name could be direct process. If composing name could be direct process, you want to enter the direct process from outside, you can't do it.
No, unless you have the service. If you don't have a service, it won't even show the WSDL URL. If you don't have a service, it won't even show that. Even for the direct binding also, it will not show the URL. The URL will be shown in a different directly here. No, the one which I was searching, right? So there is a separate window. I mean, in this window it will show. Okay, and if you see this, you try this thing, and it will be a different thing. You know, what did you say? It cannot be the other way. Except the soap, you will not be able to see anything. Okay, I mean, not having the service is a far away thing, right? Even though if you have a service, if it is not a web service binding, it will not show. It must be a web service binding, right? And that binding is determined by history. I am showing binding.ws means it's a web service soap binding. Instead of this, what I was doing in the composite, it was a direct binding somewhere, right? I was showing.
Yeah.
When you say binding.direct, then what it is? It will go through the T3 protocol. And in the same way, when you say binding.adf, and this will be registered as an ADF component, right? And so that it will be invoked as a Java class, right? And it will not have, and the service name is equal to your legal process name. There are a couple of things. So using the Java ADF program, you can invoke this web service. You cannot invoke it with the SOAP here, right? And in the same way, you have a couple of bindings. Binding.b2b, binding.jca. I mean, it's again the Java program. It's the JCA. Earlier it was ADF. So if you are using the ADF application, your Beeple web service, the whole web service will become a ADF BC, business component. So you can use it in the ADF framework. Otherwise, if you want to make it as a simple Java, you can use JCA binding, and you have configuration file and some student.jca file, and there are a couple of other properties, and for that you have to create a JCA file and give some files and kind of stuff. Then it will be a JCA framework. And JCA is one variety of Java BC framework. It's not the full. So there are a couple of other bindings.
B2B.
Yeah, it is a B2B means you can invoke. B2B has a separate protocol. I mean, anybody aware of e-commerce? EDI files, B2B servers, B2B protocols. I mean, like HTTP, B2B servers has its own protocol. Okay, I didn't remember, so it starts from X, some X protocol is there. So it's also TCP/IP. Extra 2.5. I didn't remember some protocols, and with that you can actually invoke, and their payload is not XML, their payload is EDI document. Okay, and you can have the EDI document also, EDI custom document. That's a B2B because 11G supports, 11G has internal B2B servers. Okay, but the problem is you need to take a license for that. Otherwise, it will be there, but it will not be active. Okay, there are a couple of things like that. Right, there are so many bindings. You know, if you say visit, it will be a plain Java class. If it is JCA, it is also Java binding, but JCA framework. JCA framework is a Java connectivity architecture, right? It has a resources binding and connection factory connection, and there are separate things. And if you say visit, then it will be a WSDL binding. I mean, it's a Java binding. A Java program can invoke it, right? Any questions? So I will show you the visit binding. Not now. It's already time done. Right, I will show you the visit binding. I'll write a small Java class and I'll bind it as a visit binding as a reference. And from Beeple, I'll try to invoke it. For Beeple, it is a web service, but internally it is a Java. And for binding, if I make it, a Java program can invoke a Beeple process directly. That time it will be binding dot visit. Okay. All right. With dehydration store, right? If you know the MDS, then you will understand what is that. Alright. So in the dehydration store, what we are storing? We are storing the instance details, the payload, the activities, and all that information. And there is one more store in 11G called metadata store, and it is not there in 10G. Okay. In 10G, what all the library files that you have, jar files and all, that will be stored on a file system, right? Jar files and everything, they were stored on a file system. But from 11G, I mean especially the WebLogic implementation, you can configure something called a metadata store, and what all the jar files, and you have the WSDL files, XSD files, XML files, any file which you want to use it across your components deployed on the server, and those components you can store it on MDS, metadata store. A metadata store can be backed up with a file system or the database or any kind of storage. Okay, there is a concept called metadata store concept, and for this a persistent storage can be a file system or a database, and there is no change. Generally, JDeveloper uses a file system and your server uses a database. So whatever the jar files, everything that you have deployed earlier, it was storing in the file system, but it will store in a metadata store. And this is mostly, it is very, very important when you have the clustered environment. Okay, when you have the clustered environment, if you deploy it on a metadata store, all cluster nodes will be looking into the same metadata store. That means if you deploy at one place, immediately it will be affected on the other cluster nodes. Of course, the other cluster nodes will fetch the jar file from the metadata store and it will deploy, it will extract it to the local directory. Okay, but there is a single way, right? If you deploy some element in the metadata store, and what all the cluster nodes that you have, every cluster node is looking into the same metadata store, and you will achieve, I mean, the functionality of deploy at one place and, I mean, configure at one place and seamlessly deployed in all the cluster nodes. Okay, this is a purely WebLogic concept. Metadata store is a pure WebLogic concept, and SOA also uses that. And it uses, we actually use this metadata store for ADF, jar files, any jar file, ER files or WAR files, everything you deploy, it goes into the metadata store. Okay, and for us, what we can do is, we can do something called, if we have commonly used XSD files, let us say error.xsd or commonly used XSD files, jar all of them in a folder structure, jar all of them and deploy it. Where it will be deployed? It will be deployed on your metadata store. Okay, from the metadata store, you are able to retrieve it with a protocol called Aura MDS. See, now this visual is deployed on metadata store. Wherever you say direct binding means it can be invoked within your clustered environment. That means that visual has to be deployed in the metadata store. So that protocol is this. So replace 3A with quotation, replace 2F with slash. Now where this is deployed? In Aura MDS, there was a folder structure, deployed composites, slash, there is another folder inside that, and if you want to create your own structure, create folder by name, my folder and my diag, something like that. Inside that you put any XSD, any .sd and jar it. Okay, and jar it, deploy it, and then you are able to retrieve this XML file with Aura MDS code. Right, and that means it is stored on your MDS, and any project can use this file, not just one project. Any project can use this. This is a metadata store file for all common files, and especially in Beeple SOA, for all common XSDs and WSDL files and common XSDs, where you store it in a metadata store, so that anyone share it, and at one point you change, it reflects everyone. Right? So that is metadata store. But there are other applications for ADF, everything. In fact, any WAR file, any jar file, any ER file, it will be stored in a metadata store. Okay? Dehydration store is something like a data, and in jar files, these are all metadata. Right? These are the two main things. And there is one more schema called SOAIntro. Okay? And that will keep the configuration of your Beeple engine, your OSB engine, and that information. That's a different thing actually. Okay, these are the three major schemas that we can use, that are incorporated in the SOA composite application. Okay, and these are all database tables. So if you go query the table, if you delete some file in that, then it is gone here. Okay. Any questions? So I'll just try to recap. And in Beeple, what we have? 10G version. So it was only the Beeple file and no composite model. And how does the Beeple engine was designed? It was designed with the help of some servlets and the EJBs. Okay, and if your Beeple is implementing synchronized request, that means request reply, then everything will be done in the sync, the servlet. And if it is asynchronous operations, that means you may have to reply back after some time. So then it will be done by the EJBs. Those are stateless EJBs. Okay, and these EJBs, intermittently will try to log the state of the instance in a data store called dehydration store. Okay, and there are certain activities, those are idempotent activities. So that means wherever you have some time, then it will push the engine to store that. Those activities are like wait activity, invoke activity, and kind of stuff. Receive activity, not invoke. Wait activity and the receive activity. Receive activity means you have to wait for someone to give the data, right? So wherever you have some time, it will go, right? And non-idempotent activities, it will not force. And there are some, predefined commands to push, the data into the dehydration store. That's a different story. And for for asynchronous operations, for sync operations, dehydration store will be hit only after the request has been replied. For async operations, only at the time of idempotent activities. Even there is no reply, right? Idempotent activities. And meanwhile, the data will be there in the recovery manager, recovery space, and someone has to go to the recovery space and see if there are instances, and if they recover automatically, then that will be recovered to dehydration store. At the time, it will not use a database connection from a connection tool. Yeah, it's a kickstart connection it will use. And basically, the transaction wise, there are a lot of differences. So if it is asynchronous BPEL invocation, that will be a different transaction boundary by default. Yes, there are parameters to actually bring that into the same parent transaction, but by default it is a different transaction boundary, and it's a different EJB invocation altogether. When it is a different EJB invocation inside the cluster environment, there is a EJB connection pool, and you will never know what EJB that you are given with. You will be given with an EJB available at server 1, server 2, or server 3, or server 4. So that is the reason, especially when you are designing asynchronous operations, you have to make sure you don't have the dependency. If you have interdependency, then better make it as asynchronous to synchronous. Otherwise, there are some configuration parameters. In 11G, it is configuration parameter is JCA dot BPEL dot transaction. There is something, okay. Then you have to set that property as a request required. In 10G, you have to make it as a transaction participant. Okay, there are different properties that you can set. Then it will force the engine to participate in the same transaction, even though if it is asynchronous, but it is a bad design. It is a bad design, and you can force your participant saying that, boss, this is not a single unit of work, and that is the reason either you make it as a sync operation or you combine everything, give me one async operation. You have to force that one. Okay. And see, when you start tweaking that, you will end up by tweaking the whole, architecture. So that is the reason, try make architecture as clean as possible. And by the time of looking at the WSDL itself, it is the asynchronous operation. Kindly ask him, the person who is giving the WSDL, ask him whether this can perform a unit of operation or not. If it can perform a unit of operation, it has no interdependency, then you are fine. And if it has the interdependency, then tell me that was any other sync operation or merge it with the one which you have, the unit of operation. Right? These are the design considerations that you need to take before implementing SOA. Right? That is the sync dehydration store. And in the 11G, you have composite architecture, because in 11G you have BPEL, mediator, and the other components. Each component has its own responsibilities, right? A composite has a service and a reference, because a component cannot directly talk to other world. Okay, user will talk to a service, and there is a wire between service and the component. Request will be wired there, so that's how it will be used. Okay, and in 11G, new concept is metadata store. So it is used for storing your jar files, XML files, XSD files, and all this stuff. And the protocol that we use is ORA MDS /. Okay, and from the root directory you can use it. All right. So this is the whole architecture. Tomorrow we'll start JDeveloper and getting familiar with make your hands dirty, fingers dirty with the JDeveloper, and then we'll use JDeveloper to create our fast BPEL process. All right. Any questions? Any questions at this point of time? How about WSDL, XSD? You're clear, right? You understand the WSDL. If there are any questions, RPC style, document style, if they ask any questions, Are you able to answer? So WSA based correlation, right? And how security can be implemented, so protocol in the header part, and that information you must need to understand. Okay? Alright, I think time is already 5. Okay? So tomorrow what time? Same 10 to 5? 10 to 5 or 10:30 to 5:30? 10 to 5? Okay, combine it. Yeah, actually today it was communicated like 10:30. I think it was my mistake. So I have informed Shiva as 10:30. Considering that I was doing with you, so I thought on that one on 10:30. It was my mistake. Right? So tomorrow you can combine 10 o'clock. Right?